Start the recording and then we can start the session.
Yeah, so the recording has started and we are live now. So on to you, Sadaf.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the last session of the day. For this session, we have with us Dr. Till Grallert, and Dr. Till will be speaking on global digital humanities and minimal computing. Before I request Dr. Till to start, I'd like to introduce Dr. Till. Dr. Till Grallert is a social historian and research associate at the Orient-Institut, Beirut of the Max Weber Foundation. He completed his PhD with a thesis titled To Whom Belong the Streets? Property, Propriety, and Appropriation, the Production of uh, Public Space in Late Ottoman Damascus. His current research aims at establishing a genealogy of urban food riots as a repertoire of contention and genuine political negotiations of the social contract between the rulers and the ruled in the Eastern Mediterranean between 18th and 20th century. In addition, he developed a strong interest in digital humanities and the socio-linguistics of early Arabic newspapers. He is a co-organizer of the biannual Digital Humanities Institute Beirut since 2015 and co-editor of the online chronology of Arabic periodicals. In the framework of his research project, Open Arabic Periodical Editions, Dr. Till has been working on open, collaborative, and scholarly digital editions of early Arabic periodicals such as Muhammad Kurd Ali's journal Al-Muktabas and Abdul Qadir Iskandari's Al-Hakan. His recent publications include Mapping Ottoman Damascus Through News Reports, A Practical Approach, and Urban Food Riots in Late Ottoman Bilad al-Sham as a repertoire of contention. So with your permission, sir, can we start the session?
Sure. Thank you very much, Sada, for this very kind introduction. And thank you very much for inviting me to present today. It's quite a big honor to be able to present my work to such a group of people. The title, as I've already said, is a bit misleading because I will focus mainly on a case study. So it's not as broad as it seems to be. I'm not talking about global DH in general terms or computing, provide a genealogy of either of these terms, but actually focus on a very specific research project, which I try to contextualize within the Global South. I'm sitting currently in rural Germany because we fled Lebanon, and my internet connection is actually quite bad. To remedy that, I have posted the link to the slides in the chat, so you can follow along. Also, slides do contain quite a lot of links, so it's also worthwhile to follow them along for that purpose because there's additional reading, links to projects, etc., that you can then click on. So let me try to share my screen, and then we can start. So there's plenty of share. There we go. Does it work? Is it is it large enough?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. So whenever something is not working, please interrupt me and we try to remedy that. If I look a bit weird in the camera, that's due to me looking at the second screen, which is off-centered from the camera. So it's not a lack of intention, it's rather the opposite. I'm looking at another screen. So let me start. What I'm going to talk about today, I'd say I take about 30 minutes, if that's okay with you. You can interrupt me at any point. I'm totally open to that if there are questions, comments, etc. It's basically a three-part type talk today. I start with focusing on the general affordances of the Global South when it comes to digital humanities and digital cultural heritage. I then introduce my idea of bootstrapping additions to address some of these inaccessibilities, and finally talk about the sample implementation of this idea in the form of my project, Open Arabic Periodical Editions. So to start, I want to kick off with the question posed by Alex Hale and Elika Ortega in their chapter on global outlooks and digital humanities, namely the question of what do we need as the guiding principle of whatever we're designing in digital humanities? And clearly, when we talk about early Arabic periodicals published across the Eastern Mediterranean from the mid-19th century onwards, we first and foremost need preservation of the actual physical artifact, as well as access to these artifacts. based on the argument that the societies of the Global South have a right to unhampered access to their own cultural records and on their own terms, which is of course complicated by many of these cultural artifacts are actually held in institutions of the Global North. A lot of and challenges. So digitization seems to be the obvious solution to both preserving artifacts and making them accessible to the larger public. So we have a of digital and periodical papers, and we have these expectations both from scholars and publics to answer core questions basically with a single click of a button, right? You all encountered these challenges of like, it's digitized, now it's open. But what does this open actually mean? And I think this question merits some attention, and I will focus on that for the first bit of my talk. I provide that many scholars have when we come to the material at hand when we talk about periodicals. For instances, we have questions regarding the network of periodicals. How do they reference each other? Which periodical is read by whom? How often are they cited, etc.? What are these intellectual networks represented in the press? Which would be a common digital humanities question, right? And when we talk about digitization, most of us have the expectation that we can answer these questions and rather easily generate these particular plots. Reality, of course, is very different. You all have run into these, I'm sure about that. Access is limited and very unequal. The data itself, available data, is very limited and unequal again. And metadata is very limited and unequal. So the main proposition here is to say that digitization doesn't mean online, doesn't mean accessible, right? And I try to identify 5 levels of inaccessibility. I'm not sure they pertain to every cultural artifact to the same extent, but I think this aspect different always have to be addressed when we talk about the level of accessibility is arguably the original cultural physical artifact itself. In many instances, when we talk about, sorry, that is a slide too far, when we talk about the cultural heritage of the Global South, it's rather unknown. The history of the press in many areas of the world is not well researched. So many titles, for instance, are not known. If I'm looking as in my research project on food riots, I would be knowing about certain events in Aleppo in 1910. And I would love to be able to identify the newspaper that was published in Aleppo at that time in order to then to look for a library that holds the newspaper, etc. But as it stands, we don't even know which titles were published at a given time at a given place. So I cannot even start looking for digital artifacts of knowledge about the physical artifact. And I think that holds true for other areas as well. The second level of inaccessibility is the survival and collection bias, which arguably leads to digitization bias. So in terms of survival and preservation, we see active destruction of cultural artifacts, both by iconoclasts across the Middle East, and we all have heard about ISIS destroying Palmyra, etc. But also, on the other hand, by neoliberalism, the cutting of funding for cultural heritage institutions. And on the other hand, of course, there's a decay of the material itself, particularly when we talk about newspapers. It's brittle paper, cheap paper to begin with, and it's prone to decay. In terms of collecting and access, we see absences of infrastructures and channels of knowledge. We dispersed collections, very limited, which may be incredible. And an example of that is on this map. Here you see collections of al-Muqtabas as presented. So, and the data is pulled from WorldCat and the Arabic Union Catalog, both of which, of course, are biased towards certain regions of the world. But what it illustrates is that there are almost no complete holdings of a print run, so that if you were interested in reading across the entire print run, you had to travel a substantial bit, and this is expensive. So digitization in consequence, is done piecemeal by individual holding institutions. So they digitize what they have, they do not digitize what, there is no clear targeted plan at a specific periodical. Digitization is expensive, and I come to that. And these expenses have to be justified by curators vis-a-vis a funding agency. And that usually results in shiny, expensive material being digitized and not metal stuff relevant for social history. So digitization is, as I said, labor and resource intensive, and this cannot be stressed enough. It is really, really expensive. You have to get the data, that is text, facsimiles, bibliographic metadata. This involves scanning of images, and we talk about hundreds of thousands of pages, either human transcription or some sort of automated transcription system, which are particularly ill-suited for scripts from the Global South. We come to that again. Then we have to transform that data into human machine readable additions, i.e. we have to model that. And this is a lot of manual work and scholarly editorial work. And finally, hosting, sharing, and preserving the data potentially indefinitely is of course expensive and comes with running costs. So leads to the third level of inaccessibility, in my view, which is that digital infrastructures, despite all promises towards the opposite, are rooted in the epistemic hegemony of late 20th century Anglo-American neoliberal capitalism. That's a very long slide title. What I mean with that is that we face socio-technical infrastructures within which digitization is expensive, and thus there's an incentive to subcontract the work to workers and companies that are not familiar with the artifacts they're digitizing, and who use technology stacks that are not tailored to the artifact. That's not ill will. It's the inherent built-in logic of capitalism. You try to outsource it to the cheapest subcontractor. That's one thing. The other thing is that interfaces, and we talk about interfaces in any meaning of that word, are designed to maximize the return on investment for the vendor, which means we have data silos that cannot interoperate. Vendors force you to log into their websites to access material, etc. There is no application programming interfaces for sharing machines between computers, and they do not adhere to standard compliant formats. Instead, they try to tease you in using their platform constantly, saving everything on their platform, not on your own computer, etc. And these interfaces and data models are tailored to Western conceptions of cultural heritage, whatever that is. They make use of Gregorian calendars, name schemes that have forename, surname, etc., languages in Latin script. You're familiar with that. But it has a severe impact on what is digitized and how. And this even comes down to the very script. There's no time to actually talk about Unicode, but it would be an interesting endeavor to talk about Unicode and how that industry consortium is governing how we can even input text into a computer, which might not actually be suited to Arabic script or Urdu scripts or whatever scripts you have. So there's an example of paywalls due to copyright issues. If you're not sitting in the US, many of the cultural heritage, scanned cultural heritage from the Middle East is inaccessible due to fears of being sued. Interfaces, which means the communities the artifacts belong to cannot access them because if they don't speak English, right? So finally, we come to the fourth level of inaccessibility, which is the digital artifact itself. And here we encounter numerous problems, as I already said. When it comes to Arabic, and I want to talk about text, facsimiles, and metadata, we have the problem that automated transcriptions is still very bad. And it's hidden behind paywalls. It's of unknown quality because vendors do not have any statistics of character errors. There's no and APIs. On the other hand, we have crowdsourced shadow libraries, however you want to call them, that provide a mix of pirated, genuine texts that come with their own problems, namely lack of metadata, unknown editing principles, unknown quality, etc., which results in them not being able to be reliably cited. And again, you have examples on my slides of the abysmal state of automatically transcribed Arabic texts on very expensive subscription-only platforms. On the other hand, this is the image of a shadow library. They create a digital artifact which is completely independent of the original because they do not follow metadata practices of issue numbers, volume numbers, page numbers, headings. They completely throw that out the window and create something new, which is probably very creative, but not very helpful if you try to look at an artifact at it. So in terms of facsimiles, the same holds true. And I've already shown you an example implementation here. This is the British Library and the Endangered Archives Program, which is a brilliant program. It is laudable effort to save archives across the world. But the problem, of course, is they have a proprietary user interface, which is English only. And they do not provide access beyond scrolling through pages in a left to right reading environment, even though the original artifact is a right to left. And finally, I wanted to show you that funny image, which is an image of fake similes, as I call them, because there's a tendency to value as something authentic. And thus we see platforms that create facsimiles that are not actually facsimiles, but they pretend to be the image of a scanned cultural artifact. So what you see here on the left is the actual scan. Now you have to trust me on what I'm saying, but this is the actual page of a periodical I'm interested in, or rather an image thereof. In the middle, we see a gray transcription done by human transcribers of unknown origin, location, etc., who just left out parts of the text. They skipped 4 pages in this text for unknown reason. That you see in the center. And on the right, another platform took the digital text, put it into a originally looking layout, and now serves it as an unsearchable image again, right? And all of a sudden, you have something that looks as if it was the scan of a physical magazine, but it is. In order to speed up a bit, we skip the bibliographic metadata problem and quickly come to the affordances of the Global South, which compound most of the levels mentioned already, right? So we have a digital divide, however you want to frame it, between largely producers in terms of hardware, software, standards, and consumers on the other hand. Languages and script tend to be foreign languages and scripts when we talk about a technology stack, when you come from the Global South. Funding is usually very limited, and if it comes, it is foreign funding. So you have to engage with foreign institutions. There are very limited local institutional backing for whatever projects we run. Our internet connections are very slow and volatile, and at least in Lebanon, even electricity cannot be taken for granted. So in Beirut, capital of Lebanon, we have 3 hours daily regular power cuts. This has to be factored in when we talk about digital solutions. Accessing editions on a server abroad is nigh impossible if my internet connection costs $60 for 20 gigabytes a month. I cannot download a page over and over and over again. And during the 3 hours in the middle, if I don't have access to a generator, I can't access anything anyway. And this is also exemplified in this map of digital humanities centers worldwide, where you see the Middle East has 2. India apparently has only 1. I'm not sure if that's current actual data, but of course, this is located in the global north. And I already talked about the technical dependencies that come with being from the global south. You have a good configuration. You have knowledge of the means to circumvent all sorts of constrictions, and you'd better be a member of a wealthy institution to be able to access these paid-for subscriptions. So coming to my idea of bootstrapping digital editions. First is, the idea is to unite available facsimiles with available transcriptions. And on the other hand, to harvest, generate, validate, and then share open metadata in order to make sources findable, locatable, even if we don't have a digital remediation at hand. The aims are to validate existing transcriptions against existing facsimiles, to improve the transcription communally in a social endeavor, in order to then train text recognition algorithms on these transcriptions in order to later be able to automatize the transcription. And finally, to make everything citable for scholars and linkable for machines, right? And in order to do so, it has to be shared with the broadest possible licenses. It's based on the principles of repurposing available and established tools, and with a preference for open, free, and simple formats and tools. And therefore, it is very largely inspired by minimal computing and pirate care. So what are the deliverables set up? There's an XML edition that links the open access text to the facsimiles. We generate structured bibliographic metadata. And we share all our scripts to produce that edition in order to then provide other people with the means to repurpose our setup. Core features are, again, open licenses. Then the social digital edition, which is hosted on GitHub, that provides the means to gradually improve transcription and markup. We make use of the European repository Zenodo for archiving data, which also provides digital object identifiers to reliably cite stuff. And we provide a static web view that is rendered on the client's browser to display facsimile and text side by side. And as a port of entry, we use a public Zotero group to access the editions. There's a summary scheme, which is probably confusing, but it shows all the bits and pieces, how they play together, or how they ought to work together. So looking at the actual implementation, we currently have a corpus of 7 periodicals that we work on, which is of course small compared to Trove Australia or these large newspaper digitization projects. But for a project that is run by volunteers, that's already quite substantial because it's the only corpus available epic periodicals of the time. So as I said, we scrape the digital text from a shadow library. In our case, this is Jamia. It has been transcribed by human transcribers. We then transform it into TI XML, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, based on the at least the workshops that took place today and yesterday, which is mostly done semi-automatically. And then we model the source because periodicals are specific or different from books in the sense that they are compilations of multiple different texts, some of them sequential. And if you wanted to look at specific features, you have to be able to address individual articles within the periodical. So we have to model that. And then we link to digital facsimiles from various sources. Everything is hosted on GitHub, as I already said. I know GitHub is a commercial platform owned by Microsoft nowadays, but the protocol behind is open source. So there is no data login. Of course, when GitHub decides to close its doors tomorrow, but at the moment, it's free of charge at the point of use. And there is no black box that logs in your data. So I skipped the question of whether this is legal. Take-home message is, yes, I think it is legal because we are not stealing anything anyway. And we are only linking to facsimiles, the only bit that might be covered by copyright. We are not downloading facsimiles, even though that's a trivial task. And if you were to address the affordances of the Global South, you actually wanted to download the facsimiles because you do not want to download them every time you look at the page. Instead, you download everything and then serve it from your local computer. That's trivial, but it's probably a copyright violation. So I'm not saying, so we are not doing it, even though every user can, of course, easily do so. So we skip the continuous improvement because I'm sure everybody is familiar with GitHub and how GitHub works, right? It's a code writing platform. It's a distributed version control. And it provides all to collaborative work on files. And in our case, these are editions, but of course, that could be anything. It could be a book you're writing together. One of the core features is, as I said, the web view. The way, sorry, I don't want to go forward. It is rendered on the client's, in the client's browser by XSLT1, which has the advantage of not having to produce a secondary version of the edition. Instead, you serve the XML file to the user, and then the user browsers renders this XML with the help of XSLT. There's a lot of advantages to that, because the web view as such is pretty much static in this regard. You only serve a static XML file, which is easy to archive, and it can run locally without having an internet connection, etc. And it's rendered by the client's browser. It again links to the GitHub source and the bibliographic metadata. Another core feature, as I said, is a Zotero group. I'm sure everyone, I'm not sure everyone is familiar with Zotero, but probably everyone is, so I don't need to explain it. It's basically a reference manager. It's free and open source. And again, it provides the feature that is called groups. So you can set up a library of references and share it with the world. And this is how we circumvent the problem if you have to render something as static websites, in addition, as static sites of one issue after the other, and you do not provide a backend. You have difficulties of providing search functionality, right? People want to have search across issues, because within issues, you can use the simple search, text search function of your browser. But if you want to search across issues, you immediately run into problems if you don't have a backend. There are means to address that, but we haven't implemented them yet. And there's no elastic pre-computed index. So what we do provide at the moment is a Zotero group, which holds bibliographic metadata for each and every article in our editions. And you can search across the bibliographic metadata and then click on any one of them, and it leads you directly into the edition. You can also potentially implement full text search with that method, because you could attach the full text as a node to each reference, and that could be done computationally. So you would get a full representation of your entire corpus in Zotero, and then could use their search functionality for providing full text search. And here you see these various views provided by Zotero. And if you see my mouse, I'm not sure if that's transmitted through Zoom, to be honest. There's a URL pointing to that particularly place in an XML file. So it's first as a URL pointing to an online representation of the edition, and then the XML ID of a specific article. So if you click on that, it actually leads you to that article. And finally, there's the preservation and long-term preservation of your data. And for that, we picked the free and open Zenodo platform. It was developed by the European CERN, the Large Electron Collider in Zurich, for their research data, which runs into the hundreds of petabytes every day. And it's publicly funded by the European Union and free to use for everyone. And the beauty is it provides digital object identifiers, so you can reliably cite your work. And it also, on one hand, it hooks into GitHub. So whenever you release something, release in terms of software development, right? So when you produce a finite version of your edition, you can release it on GitHub, and it will be automatically archived by Zenodo, provided with a digital object identifier. And then various, at least academic search engines, hook into Zenodo and can look up that metadata. So your work is ultimately findable across a large environment of academic search engines. So to conclude and have like another 30 minutes of discussions, etc., if that's okay with you, I want to provide a quick summary of bootstrapping. And so we start with getting the data, and this has two components. One is facsimiles, the other is text. And you can either link to existing facsimiles, and I would prefer doing that through the IIIF environment, which is the international image in operation framework, which allows you to access various digital copies from various institutions through the same interface, because it's a shared standard of exchange inter alia. And this, for instance, is, but I come to that in the second slide, is also supported by the Internet Archive. Keep that in mind. On the other hand, you can scan your own artifacts. And if you do so, you can use a mobile phone. There is no need for archive-grade scans if we talk about accessibility. And if we talk about the Global South, actually, I would say there is a lot of arguments against producing very large scans, because you have to serve them ultimately through internet connection, which again is prohibitively expensive. And given that most people address the internet through their mobile phones anyway, there's a question of how large a resolution can we or should we meaningfully serve if people at the end of the day look at it through a small screen of a mobile phone. The other layer is a text layer. And what we did and what I suggested to do is start with scraping existing transcriptions and then use tools developed, for the last, let's say, 5 years. And Matthew Miller had a talk at this very workshop a couple of days ago on machine learning based algorithms for transcribing Arab scripts, Persian, Urdu, etc. And there are various platforms out there. Transcribos, very user-friendly. It was originally developed by a grant from European Union, which has ran out, and due to sustainability issues, they of course now have to charge, because the actual machine learning algorithms are run on their service, and somebody has to keep them running, and this costs money. So they charge per page, which is okay, I think, if you are digitizing a manuscript. But again, if we talk about hundreds of thousands of pages for periodicals, this quickly becomes an issue. Even if the price per page is really, really small, we soon quickly talk about thousands of dollars, which most people don't have. Another platform would be the eScripta platform, which is not yet ready in terms of a very nice, easily usable user interface, which is the beauty of Transcribos. It has a very usable user interface for transcribing and producing ground truth. Second step in the workflow is to save and share the data. If you produce facsimiles, I suggest using the Internet Archive, because it provides server space for free. Like, you do not have to pay for that. And this is, it's a necessary thing for most of us. And it supports IIIF standards again. So you can make use of all the beauties of that standard by uploading your scans to the Internet Archive. You should probably make sure that you're not violating US copyright in doing so, because the physical servers of the Internet Archive are located in the United States. There's pro and contra, but being free of charge, of course, is a major incentive for what we are concerned with. For everything else, I suggest, because again, charge at the point of use. And if you're an academic, or if you purport to be an academic, you get so-called pro accounts for free, which provide even more services. And when it comes to controlled version control or serving a static website, etc., GitHub is a very simple solution, very usable in many aspects. And finally, for long-term preservation, use any publicly funded repository. One is Zenodo, but there are others. Zenodo again has the beauty of being having hooks to hook into GitHub to make things easier for you. And finally, I suggest using unique IDs for all your collaborators in order to add the manual work that goes into these digital representations in a way that is documented throughout the project and hooks into, again, other funding schemes. Finally, for as long as we talk about text editions, there's not much in terms of software that you need. You need free text editors. Problem is support for RTL from right to left scripts, of course, is patchy, depending on your operating system. there is a great, as I would say, if we talk about digital editions of textual sources, there's a great web editor called TextGridLab, funded by the German research, which is free to use for everyone again, and provides a TI editing environment. And of course, make use of version control and stable ideas for transparent authorship attribution. Finally, in order to disseminate the data, I'm very much in favor of static web pages because they're easy to archive, easy to maintain. There's no secondary content management system, etc. In my projects, I opted for XSLT1, which has flaws, given that we are already at XSLT3 for quite substantial time, which has not been adopted by browser vendors. And I'm sure XSLT support will be phased out in the near future. The other option that I'm just became recently aware of are, for instance, GitHub Actions. GitHub provides free computing power to every user in the form of a virtual machine that you can spin up, that can be triggered by commits to your GitHub repository, and then runs whatever computational task you assign to it, which could be generating a static web page from XML pages. So you could imagine a system where every change to your underlying data layer generates a change in the representation by means of GitHub Actions, including XSLT3, for instance, which is quite nice. And again, they spin up a virtual machine, they load all the codes that you tell them to load, and then they run whatever you tell them to run. You can host web views, project logs, etc. again on GitHub using GH pages, which is just a way to say there's a specific branch on every repository, which automatically is served through the internet with appropriate page headers, etc. And for bibliographic data, I suggest using Zotero. Again, you do not want, I do not want to run any sort of database backend without technical support on my own computer, without funding, etc. Instead, I prefer relying on other services maintained by other people. Arguably, this is a simple, fast, and sustainable setup with relatively little coding need. I initially set that up in less than 4 weeks of after-hour labor. Of course, the actual tinkering then took years. So in a way, yes, it is simple to get it running, but all the little twists and knobs and here and there and perfecting things, or whatever perfection is, it's not perfection, but improving things then is a very long process, arguably. The hosting, collaborative editing, long-term preservation, etc. are provided free of charge. They're not free of cost, but they're free of charge. Of course, there's a lot of cost in terms of manual labor that needs to be talked about, that you will not circumvent. And at least in my case, some features cannot possibly be automated because, as I said, we want to link facsimiles to text. And in order to do that, we have to tell the computer where a new page begins and where this representation is of that new page. And the computer cannot do so on itself. If it could, we wouldn't need to do this linking in the first place, right? If transcriptions were working, if OCR was working for ABAP scripts, we wouldn't need that step. So this is a manual task. And in our case, we had to locate 7,000 page breaks manually, which took quite some while. Finally, there is a plethora of dependencies with this sort of, of dependencies which become problematic with some sort of this. I already said search across without a backend has not yet been solved. At least I haven't solved it. I don't. There are suggestions of how one could do that, but I haven't solved that yet. There is the reliance on external data providers. So we link to facsimiles, and there is not a question if, there's only a question when you will encounter link rot. That means platforms going out of service, changing their server structure, etc. And all of a sudden, all your links are broken. That already happened twice to us. And the other thing is reliance on free tools and services will also generate link rot. Services will come to an end if you rely on Google services, for instance. Google's famous for just killing services with very short notice. same is true for other services. They will eventually go out of service, and you have to find a way to deal with that. It's great while they're working, but of course, when they go out of service, there is additional cost because now you have to think of different setup. And with that, I will say thank you very much for listening to my rather long talk. I hope it was somewhat interesting, and I'm looking forward to a discussion, Q&A, etc. There's a couple of links on the slide that you could follow. Yeah, and with that, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, sir, for the interesting session. We have some questions for you.
Oh, I stopped sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Perfect, you did already. Thank you.
So can you explain further the term pirate care?
Sure, I can. Give me a second.
Sure.
Some of the screens. There we go. Sorry. Sorry. It is a term used by the Coventry Center for Proposed Humanities. And it's originally, I try to talk and type at the very same time. That's always a bad idea. So give me a second. And here we go. So it's a term suggested by, as I said, the Center for Post-Digital Culture, at Coventry University, by Valeria Graziano, Marcel Mars, and Tomislav Medak, and others. And there's also a web page which is called pirate.care, where you can read about it. And I can read out a quote, and I would like to do that. It says, quote, "Pirate care primarily considers the assumption that we live in a time in which care, understood as a political and collective capacity of society, is becoming increasingly defunded, discouraged, and criminalized. Neoliberal policies have for the last 2 decades reorganized the basic care provisions that were previously considered cornerstones of democratic life, that is, healthcare, housing, access to knowledge, right to asylum, freedom of mobility, social benefits, etc., turning them into tools for surveilling, excluding, and punishing the most vulnerable. The name pirate care refers to those initiatives that have emerged in opposition to such political climate by self-organizing, technologically enabled care and solidarity networks." And what it builds on is a notion of pirate and piracy formulated by Gary Hall in his book, Pirate Philosophy from 2016, in which he, on one hand, outlines the copyright wars, which is quite interesting, but tries to reconsider the notion of pirate as being closely related to peira, in the meaning of trial and attempt, and thus argues that the verb peraio would make the pirate into someone who tests, who puts to proof, who makes an attempt, etc. So this notion of care, solidarity networks, self-organizing, technologically enabled, continuous attempts. It's a very conflated answer to the question. Some of it I would mention.
Yeah.
I know.
Also, GitHub, can you discuss it a little more, how it works for those who were not aware of it?
Oh, sure. So GitHub is a software development platform, and it's based on Git. And Git is a version control system. It was developed for the Linux kernel as their own version control system for software development. And there are plenty of other version control systems, but Git is built into all Linux systems, obviously, and also into Mac OS. So it comes. It's also nowadays available for Windows. And on top of Git sit software layers for collaborative software development, or a shared distributed version control. So as soon as you start working on software with more than one person, you need to share this version control across computers, etc. Have means of solving potential conflicts between your commits to a code base. And you see that I'm using software development terms in what I'm saying. And GitHub is one of the platforms that is built on top of Git. There's also GitLab, Gitbucket, etc. GitHub just happens to be the most popular. So on top of Git, they built an infrastructure for distributed version control, which is free to use for the open source community. Even though GitHub has been acquired by Microsoft in recent years, and it is used by the large software companies, which on the one hand has the advantage of it being really unlikely that it's going out of business within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And the advantage of it being solidly funded by all these paying customers, which allows for it supporting the open source community by providing free accounts. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have a question by Rohan Chauhan. He says, I don't read Arabic, but I found your Zotero really rich in metadata. Please talk a little about it as well. I'm reading early Hindi journals these days, so that so it would be very useful if you can explain how you generated that network of journals in the slides. In Hindi, the journals I have looked at refer to each other, mostly because they are competing in an emerging literary system. So please talk about ways to visualize that sort of a phenomenon.
Okay, yeah, that is actually, okay. The one thing is generating the bibliographic metadata is done automatically, right? Because periodicals are highly structured source. And we know how they are organized. They come with bibliographic data at the volume level. They come with explicit bibliographic data at the volume level. They come with explicit bibliographic metadata at the issue level. Some of this can be automatically generated when you set up an edition, because we know there's some sort of a regular publishing schedule. Even though most periodicals did never stick to the officially published schedule, there is a schedule. There's the idea of periodicity. So you can at least infer theoretical publication dates. For actual publication dates, you need external sources. Then you need external sources for verifying that. But we skip that bit for a moment. So you have metadata on the issue level, on the volume level. The issue itself is organized into articles, and it has some sort of pagination. All that can be pulled out automatically, computationally, and that's how we do it. We generate bibliographic metadata through XSLT scripts. They are all available online, so you can reuse them. And through that, we generate representations as mods, a standard maintained by the Library of Congress, which I think is easier to read than MARC, even though MARC is more established in the library community. But for scholars, like non-librarians, to read MARC is rather difficult because the fields have only field codes, numerical field codes, whereas in mods, it's more human readable, even though for a human reader encountering that bibliographic metadata, it is. Another representation is BibTeX, which is popular for reference managing software. But I also produce Zotero RDF, which has additional fields for importing into Zotero. But basically, all you see in the Zotero library is automatically generated. The scripts are in place, and you run a single XSLT transformation on the XML, and it outputs Zotero RDF, which you can import into Zotero, and that's it. And you can look at the scripts online. The other thing is how to produce that graph that I showed. Well, this specific graph is a plot of references between periodicals. For that, you have to have a full text representation of your periodicals, because you have to check in the full text, you have to search for, automatically search preferably, for references to other journals. These are highly regular in Arabic because references to other periodicals tend to be introduced by the name as said journal XYZ or newspaper XYZ. They have the word journal, majalla and jarida in Arabic before the actual title. So you can look them up automatically in the full text. We then mark that up with the XML tag and try to disambiguate these references with the head of authority files. This is necessary because sometimes journals change titles. There are multiple journals with the same title, yada, yada. But once this is done, you can basically count the number of references to a periodical title per issue or per article or whatever statistic you want, and then generate a network of references between periodicals and plot that network. The concrete network plot is done in Gephi, but the data collection is based on the automatic markup, then an XSLT script, which outputs a very simple CSV file. And this CSV file then is used for further computation and visualized with Gephi, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I really enjoyed your talk, and looking at, I actually had a looked at your GitHub, and there I think one of the most important features that I would like to highlight about your research that I have noticed is how reproducible it is because of the way it is documented. So I think if someone like us who are working in my opinion, under-resourced institutions want to kind of do that sort of work for languages that we work in, I think the way you have documented your research might be really useful for. So yeah, that's kind of the reproducibility of the research is kind of like one of the most important features that I have kind of got from your reading about your research. So thank you for that, and thank you for this wonderful talk.
Thank you very much. Even though I have to say that documentation could be much, 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 much better, I have to say. So you're giving me credit, which is probably not you. But thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for such an interesting talk. I think Professor Nishad Zaidi wants to say something. So I'll, is she? Okay. Okay. There's another question. If you can demonstrate XSLT transition from facsimile or scan, if that is possible.
Sorry, I had a. Could you repeat that, please?
If you can demonstrate XSLT transition from facsimile or scan.
I'm not sure if probably not, because the XSLT, well, okay, XSLT itself is XML, right? It's one of the families, sorry, one of the languages in the X family. And it's a computational language for transforming documents, mostly XML, but not necessarily only XML documents. So XSLT itself doesn't do anything, well, almost nothing to facsimiles, because facsimiles at the end of the day are image files, right? So I'm not sure what the question actually is meant to pose. Probably if whoever posed the question, could she or he rephrase it a bit or explain what?
Yeah, in the process of digitization, you mentioned that this is the most useful tool. So I was just wondering if you could just throw some light on that.
Okay. So you said how to transcribe text from the automatically from the facsimile, right? Is that what you? Okay. Yeah. Yes. Give me a second. I try to share my screen again. Now we see if that works. we try that out, I'd say. Share screen, I think that should do. I'm trying to launch that platform that I talked about. Screen sharing has, wait a second, I try it again. Transcribos. There it is. So I mentioned a tool which is called Transcribos. It's originally meant it's part of the handwritten text recognition family of software, but it's not limited to handwritten, because what it does, it matches through machine learning and matches text, like typed text that you put into computer, to an image. And it trains the algorithm for as long as is necessary to find the specific patterns in the image that you provided as a ground truth. So you have a very basic interface, a lot of white noise that you see right now when you see my screen. I'm logged in, that's good. I'm trying to open our project. Yeah, slow internet connection in my case. And then, for instance, I load a periodical. Let's take this one. Yes. There it is. You have a very basic interface. You have to upload your own images, which puts a lot of strain on your resources potentially, because the recognition is done on their servers. Which makes sense. There's a lot of computing power. You do not have to care for setup, maintenance, etc. But of course, this means about, let's say, 100,000 pages. That easily means gigabytes of images that you need to send over an internet connection, which you might or might not have access to. But when that's done, what you're presented with is basically an image, which you see here in the center. And this is not necessarily a good example because it's a very, very messy page. The scan was done by a guy at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, as part of the Endangered Archives program of the British Library. They are not very great scans. A lot of them are out of focus. And I quickly produced a black and white representation in order to play around with that program. But what you see, so it's a difficult scan, to say the least. It has blots and bits that are really difficult to read. It's a mix of fonts of languages. So at the top you have Arabic in at least 4 different fonts. That's the title of the periodical. There's the subtitle explaining what type of periodical is. Then comes the name of the editor, and then some information on how often it is printed, etc. And then the same information is repeated in French. Again, mix of fonts, etc. Plus there's some bit of handwritten dedication on the first page for the library copy. And first of all, you need to run a layout recognition algorithm across that page to figure out where is text, where is no text, what is the reading order, etc. And when it comes to periodicals, this is usually the most difficult part. Let's just jump to any regular, no, that was stupid, any regular page. Because as soon as you have multi-column layout, layout algorithms are frequently challenged. They assume a left reading order and a right to left reading order, and then you have to manually resort your columns. This is at least the case in Transcribos. This will eventually be fixed by the developers, but again, there's this hegemonic norm of left to right. But in this case, you see layout recognition is rather good. It identifies the text lines. It also catches some non-text items, to be honest, in the lower left. And then you provide a transcription of these lines of text. You can click on each and every line. If you see that here, you see on the right-hand side the transcription highlighted in blue. Do you see that? Yeah? Okay. And you can either transcribe by hand, you can directly edit this text here. This is like, works like a text editor. But you can also provide, if you already have a transcription of that page and an image of that page, you could submit both of them together to Transcribos. You do not have to manually re-enter the text. That works rather well. And this is how this transcription came into being. It's based on one of our editions. But you could correct, now you can correct the text on the right against the facsimile. And when this is done, you have to go to something that is called tools on the left-hand side of the screen. And you can, for instance, you see text recognition, for instance. There are other, here at the lower left under other tools, you see the text to image button. This is the tool you need when you already provide a transcription and an image, because then the computer tries to fit them together. This you can find here. You can also find text recognition where you can, if your language already has, if already models created for your language, you can select them here. And that's probably one of the major critiques of Transcribos, is that even though the interface is open source, not all of the code is. And currently you cannot share your language models outside of Transcribos. Which is, on the other hand, other tools can do that. So you can transmit your language model to whatever channel you want. That's not the case with Transcribos. But it's a great program for producing ground truth, for aligning transcription and image. Because at the moment, this is still free to use. And if you have a language model, you can select it here, any one of them. There is some search, we search for Arabic, and there will be most models. They provide some information on their character error rate when you select the model. It explains what it was based on. In this case, a few pages based on Fatawa al-Mahdi. It has been run in 100 circles, and it is an improvement of an earlier existing model. And it's a very small sample. You see, it has not even 6,000 words. So the training sample is very small. Sorry, can I increase that a bit? You see the learning curve of the algorithm, and you basically see that it ran for 100 epochs, right? It's the bottom of the scale, the bottom scale. And you see that basically within the first 5 epochs, it reached its final character error rate. You wouldn't have needed to train it for 100 epochs. 10 would have been completely enough. And what you see, it stabilized at a character error rate of around 6 to 7%. Sorry, it's 6.19%, which is rather good given the small training sample. It means that 6 out of 100 characters are wrongly recognized. Some of these might be not even wrong recognitions, to be honest, because due to the, as you can see here, I'm not sure, are you reading Arabic script? You can see on the, if I click on that line, the second line from the top, you see that the spelling in the original is defective in the sense that if you look at the second letter, it's only the seed of the Hamza, right? It doesn't show you the Hamza. It could be anna, inna, an, in, etc. And the transcriber, the human transcriber, made a decision. They said it has to be inna and recorded the Hamza. Now, is an error. Like in terms of text recognition, that is an error because it's overcorrected. The inna is not in the facsimile. At least, like we all know, it must be inna, but it's not there. So some of the character error rate is due to this problem that we have an overcorrected ground truth, which provides hamzas where they are not in the original, and which will produce errors. But this is a fairly good error rate, to be honest. If you were interested in distant reading, this is completely sufficient. Like 6% character error rate across 200,000 pages is totally okay if you're looking at it at scale. And you can improve the model if you provide more ground truth than probably 6,000 words, if your transcription is better. Some of the character error rate might also be due to this very crappy scan, to be honest. As you can see, a lot of the letters are not actually connected. And on, so you can find training material in English. Yes. I stopped sharing again.
That is excellent. Perfect.
We have one more question. What is a technological stack? This is the last.
That's simple. It's metaphor. You have various technologies, and you stack one on top of the other, right? In order for something to work, you have to have different layers of technologies together. And you're usually, particularly when you're working with non-Latin scripts, it's like the chain. It's as strong as the weakest link. When you have one layer in technology stack that is not Unicode compliant, your entire technology stack will not be Unicode compliant. It's a common problem in what we do, right? For instance, talking about the very briefly about the plot at the beginning, this network graph that Rohan asked about, it's done in Gephi, and I'm using an computer. And Gephi is software built using the Java environment. And Java for Macintosh couldn't render Arabic script until like 2 years ago. Very simple. It could visualize the network, but it couldn't plot your labels onto the network. It's one of the examples. The entire stack before the visualization is Unicode compliant, but the final program you use to render that network cannot render Arabic script in the right order, and thus your network plot looks silly. Very common thing. Another thing to mention when you talk about software stacks is probably the Unicode issue, because I just learned about it recently, so it's still fresh in my mind. But its political nature to the consortium means that you have multiple glyphs for the same letter in Arabic script, right? We all know that a kaf is a kaf is a kaf. There is no Arabic, Persian, Urdu, etc. Kaf. It is a kaf. Every reader of that kaf will know the sound that should be followed, that should be pronounced if you enunciate it. But for the computers, these are actually 3 different letters. And the example is that, and now outsourcing technology stack, and these are socio-technological infrastructures, you outsource your transcription. And usually what you do is you do double blind transcription. So if you have an Arabic source, you usually go to Pakistan because they read Arabic script, but they do not overcorrect the text because they usually do not read Arabic. So they do not automatically correct what they consider spelling errors, right? That's the idea behind it. But that means they use an Urdu keyboard for inputting Arabic. But that means that the kaf has an Urdu keyboard key point. Now, if I use my Arabic keyboard and search for Mecca, it won't find the instances of Mecca input with an Urdu keyboard, even though it's mim, kaf, tamarbuta. That's Mecca. We all know what it is. But for the computer, these are 2 different words. If you put them in with an Urdu keyboard or an Arabic, Saudi Arabic keyboard, it's also different if you input it through an Egyptian Arabic keyboard. And a lot of the softwares in your technology stack is not aware of that problem. Your search algorithms aren't aware of that problem. Your users are definitely not aware of the problem. But when they search, they will assume that they find every instance of Mecca in your corpus, putting in Mecca with their own keyboard. And they will not. And this is fairly different from Latin script technology stacks. And at least it needs to be mentioned. I'm not sure, and if you want to remedy it, you have to write your search algorithms yourself. So that's probably an answer to technology stack, if that makes sense. Or the importance of thinking about stacks.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for this enriching session. I would like to request Professor Nishad Zaidi to give the closing remarks, please. And please kindly just turn on your videos so we can take some screenshots. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadaf. And thank you so much. Till we couldn't have asked for a better valedictory address. We had this 7-day workshop. It was, series of talks. I think 16 sessions in all. Each session 2 to 3 hours long. And when we began thinking about this workshop, by we I mean, me, Sehra, and Asra, when we began talking about it, we did not really visualize it, the way it has evolved, and it has evolved in such an organic way. We began with lectures, basic lectures by Dr. Shauvik Mukherjee on understanding digital humanities in India. From there, we moved on to issues like critical digital archives, digital treatment of Hindi poetry, OCR in Arabic Islamic texts, and so on and so forth. Then we addressed the issue of designing, where we had a wonderful session by Dr. Padmini Ray Murray. And then we discussed digital editions and text analysis and TEI and XML and all these basic technologies for digitization. That was a session by Dr. Shri Ganesh. And today we had 2 wonderful sessions by Yusuf Saeed, in which he demonstrated his own visual archive that he has created, an amazing archive. And finally, your session has tied up all these threads so beautifully, articulating many of the skepticism that we have in our mind, many of the doubts that we have in our minds, questions concerning global South, global North, accessibility. These are the things that we keep talking about. And you also demonstrated and showed us that, how we can do it, because otherwise the question of accessibility is so big that sometimes we feel that probably we are not able to do it, or we won't be able to do it. And the issues of grant and funding, all those issues, in any case, remain, major roadblocks in our attempt at digital humanities. So you have really tied up all the threads beautifully, and you have shared your work. I'm sure all of us in our own ways will be reaching out to you, and probably we will have more chances to interact with you. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful session. And I would like to take this opportunity to especially thank 2 of my students, Zaira and Nasra, who have worked day in and day out to make this happen, and all the wonderful rapporteurs and moderators who, very willingly cooperated and came forward and spent so much time and energy on this. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, and thank you, Sean, for coming for attending sessions, and also Rumi, who attended a few sessions. Thanks to everyone.
And thank you, Nishat ma'am, for hosting this amazing workshop. And we are actually all going to meet in the coming conference. So formally, I would like to invite everybody here to join us on the 21st and 22nd, that is Monday, Tuesday next week, for the conference, where we hope to continue a lot of these conversations. So please be there. And you can reach out to us through email if you want a link for it. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Till. It was wonderful.
Thank you all very much. It was a lovely workshop. I learned a lot from some of the sessions I attended. Thank you so much. It was a great event.
I hope you have taken your picture. Huh?
Yes, we have.
Great. Bye.